All right, moving on with Chapter 8. We left off at the map of the Louisiana Purchase. Okay? And you know what? I want to go back here to the Jefferson and the Judiciary, because I had some questions. Some students had asked me about the Judiciary Act, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate what was going on. So the Judiciary Act of 1801, Thomas Jefferson is thinking, hey, this is the last straw. You really are, you're really infringing on my rights as a president by reducing the number of justices and appointing all these new judges and justices of the peace, and they're all Federalist. So he had no opportunity to appoint any Republicans. Okay? So this is really the first major question in the judiciary system regarding this. Now, this isn't the only time that the judiciary was reduced or that someone tried to reduce it. Okay? You'll see again, Roosevelt tries to reduce the number of judges. He is unsuccessful. Okay? But the Judiciary Act of 1801 was successful. And Thomas Jefferson finally got it repealed, okay, in 1802. But how important are appointments to the Supreme Court or judges to the judiciary system? Okay, why?
Because they can overturn any law.
They can overturn any law? Okay. Do they just do it arbitrarily? Okay. Thank you. They vote constitutional or unconstitutional. So Jefferson is upset not just because of the judiciary, but he's upset because of the partisanship that's being played out in the judiciary, right? And it's the partisanship that he really has a problem with. Okay? And Marbury versus Madison, when Adams is appointing all these late judges, the Judiciary Act not only reduced the number of Supreme Court justices, but it increased the number of judges. And so as he appointed all these, he didn't get the appointment letter out to Marbury. Okay? James Madison, under Thomas Jefferson, was supposed to send that out and did not. Okay? So under judicial review, which is the first instance of judicial review that we see again and again in our society and in our constitutional law, that Marbury or Madison had a moral obligation to serve it, but no legal obligation to serve it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so how often does the judiciary talk about morals? Not very often. Okay, so the moral aspect of this was targeted to who? Actually not. Because who's ultimately responsible for all of the employees under you? The supervisor. Who's Madison's supervisor as Secretary of State? Somebody said it. Jefferson, the president, right? So Jefferson is getting slammed by the judiciary for not appointing this. But he sees it as a partisan slam. Okay? And so he doesn't attack John Marshall. He doesn't go after John Marshall, but it really makes him angry. Okay? And he just didn't like that moral partisanship in the whole scheme of the judiciary. And how often does that happen? Are there morals included in all of the rulings of the Supreme Court? Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? Can you really answer that question? How biased or unbiased is the Supreme Court justice? Supreme Court justice is supposed to rule on the laws.
When it's whether they think that it's the spirit of the law or the letter of the law.
Spirit of the law, letter of the law. Are they supposed to do spirit of the law? It's that gray area, right? And so when you talk about partisans and you talk about ideologies, and Thomas Jefferson's all about ideology, right? Okay? But he's becoming more and more realistic as president. Okay? Talk about the ideologies. You talk about today's ideologies. Okay? Federalists and Republicans think differently. The Democrats and Republicans think differently in a lot of cases, right? They approach things in different manners. Correct? In many cases. Are they ultimately totally ideologically separated? No. Because when you get down to it, everyone wants a decent life, food, and shelter, right? Yes? Okay. So, so this is setting the precedence for many things, including the morality issue of the judiciary. Okay, so I just wanted to go back and kind of reiterate that. All right, so the Louisiana Purchase, you can see the trail, the route that they took. They were tasked with going up and following the Missouri River to its headwaters. And look at these ornate covers. Okay, this is the cover of the Purchase. I mean, it's fascinating how ornate these things are. And boy, wouldn't it be neat to see this in real life? Oh, it is. It's in the National Archives. And here's the actual text of the Louisiana Purchase. All right. So getting to the election of 1804, Thomas Jefferson's doing relatively well in all aspects. He's doubled the size of the country, and the country's starting to pay off its debts. Okay? Now, granted, he's reducing the number of troops that we have in order to accomplish that. All right? And if you're trying to make a connection to today's society, look at the way the state budget of Alaska is being cut. Okay? You can see dramatic cuts. Thomas Jefferson, fortunately, didn't have to make quite so dramatic of cuts. So, the election of 1804, Thomas Jefferson is running again. Okay? He's running, and Burr, who is his vice president, okay, has been in intrigues with the Federalists, like, for his entire vice presidency. Okay, remember that he lost after how many votes in the House?
2.
No, quite a few more. Anybody remember? 35. 35. It was tied. Alexander Hamilton convinced some of the Federalists at least one Federalist to vote for to vote separately. Okay? And so they voted for Thomas Jefferson instead of Burr. Because the 12th Amendment said that whoever got the most votes would win, and the second would become vice president. So Burr became vice president, started his, probably added to his acrimony with Hamilton. Okay? The 12th Amendment that came out in 1804 talked about separate ballots. Okay, so you can run as president and you can run as vice president instead of everybody runs and whoever gets the most wins. So they could avoid another Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, 35 votes in 6 days issue. All right. Burr, however, was not well liked in the Republican Party. So they dropped him. And when they dropped him, they put in George Clinton as Jefferson's vice president, and they ran against Federalists Charles Pinckney and Rufus King. Okay? Charles Pinckney and Rufus King only won 2 states because things were pretty good. People were pretty happy. Okay? And the Lewis and Clark expedition started. Remember, in 1803, Louisiana Purchase was signed. It was actually signed April 30th of 1803. Okay? And Lewis was sent out by Thomas Jefferson to find the water route across the continent, all right, to see if there was one across the continent, to explore the territory, find the Missouri River water source. If we could get to the coast, or when we got to the coast, we could boost China's trade. And, okay, this is the first time you've heard about China, really. How important is Chinese trade?
Well, you gotta go through Europe if you want anything Chinese.
Yes, yes. But how important was it?
It was all the spices, silk.
Teas, spices, silk. Okay, you got some of that from India. But the China trade was extremely important, and you hear very little about the China trade. But it was one of the, as you'll see later, it's a major reason for expansionism in the 1800s. All right? And so, even though it's not always named, it's always one of the reasons behind that expansionism. Okay, so here you're seeing expansionism in 1804, and one reason is because of the China trade. And if and when we got to the coast and could get a water route to the coast, we could divert the fur trade, which was being done in and past the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, we could divert that trade to American trade and help our economy. Okay, this is what Jefferson is looking for. So he sent Lewis to Philadelphia to the American Philosophical Society. Remember that place? Remember who started it? Our good buddy? Ben Franklin, thank you. Yes. So, a crash course in the sciences. He was also, so he had to learn about plants, animals, insects, all kinds of information. He was also supposed to record as much information on that as well as native languages and native customs that he found along the way. So as they started out, they met up with a fur trader, Charbonneau, and his wife would be one of the most famous women in America. Who helped Lewis and Clark? Yes, thank you, Sacagawea. Okay? All right, so they left St. Louis in May of 1804, and in November of 1805, they had made it to the Pacific Ocean. But they also discovered there was 300 miles of no waterway that you had to traverse in order to get to the Pacific Ocean. All right? All right, so here is Jefferson's congressional request to fund an expedition out west. And I'm sorry, I'm catching a cold, so my throat's kind of sore. Okay, so this is confidential, gentlemen of the Senate and of the House of Representatives is who it's addressed to. Okay, but I want you to look at the date. Can anyone read that date? January 18th, 1803. Okay? Thomas Jefferson was the consummate scholar. He was always looking for more information. Okay? He had written to them prior to the journey, right? And he had written to them prior to what else? Yes, prior to the election. But what else? When was the Louisiana Purchase signed?
A couple years after he had already proposed this.
Not a couple years, but a couple months. April 30th, 1803. Okay? So, he is always looking forward. All right? And this is truly what you want a leader to do, is to be looking forward. Right? And predicting and projecting what the country needs, or what the company needs, or what the family needs. Okay? And then also, one thing I want to point out is that whenever Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter, he had created a machine that would copy his letters automatically. Okay, so as he wrote, the other side of the machine wrote the same letter out. Okay? Yes, you saw a picture of it. I had a picture for you. All right, and here's Lewis and Clark's map. This is what they had to look for. Okay? And this map is one that we actually got to see in the American Philosophical Society. This is where it's housed. The original journals from the journey and this map, which is really super cool in a geeky kind of way.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta love the geeky thing. Okay, so there were challenges on the home front. So Vice President Burr doesn't like Alexander Hamilton, does he? No, unfortunately, Alexander Hamilton is on the, not quite the top of his list, but pretty close to the top of his list of people that he really dislikes. So he challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel, which they fought on July 11th of 1804. Who won that duel?
Shot and killed him.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He was Alexander Hamilton was mortally wounded that day and died the next day. But yes. So you have a vice president who just shot another, someone of repute. And so he's charged with murder in 2 states. And the reason for that is because they fought in New Jersey. And so New Jersey, they charged him with murder, and New York charged him with murder. Okay? So he's indicted for murder in 2 states. He starts running, right? He fled. And it's just a story that you just shake your head at and go, really? What were you thinking? Were you thinking?
Why did they have a duel if they knew that whichever one's charged will be indicted?
Why did they have duels? Anyone?
In England, if you were charged, or if you were accepting a duel, it is accepting the challenge of honor between your two families.
Exactly. Thank you, Emmanuel. It's all about honor.
Then why would they charge someone for murder for doing it?
Ah. And this is ultimately...
Normally you don't die in a duel.
Bingo. Nor if you're unlucky, you do, right? He's not the only president or vice president to fight duels. Andrew Jackson fought 14 duels.
Is he the one with really flowy kind of shirts, so they shoot at him, but they don't know where his body is, so they can hurt him?
You know, I don't know. I haven't heard about that.
My teacher, Mr. Bowles, told me about someone who did that.
It could very well have been him. But it's all about honor, and ultimately the reason that the charges were dropped is because it was a fair duel. They both had accepted the duel, right? But it was outlawed 2 years before, after Alexander Hamilton's son had died in a duel. Okay? So you just scratch your head and go, really? Is this really happening?
Why would he accept a duel after his son died in a duel?
Honor. Honor. Okay? And honor is really important. Okay, so Burr leaves. He's aligning with, and he's been aligning with the Federalists, right? So he goes and he is aligning himself with General James Wilkinson, who was the governor of the Louisiana Territory. Governor of Louisiana Territory. Huge area, right? Okay? Wilkinson's also a double agent, right? He's in he's in Spain's employ. Okay, so you have these things going on, and you're like, wow, this is impressive, really. I mean, think about the different things that are going on here, the intrigues that are happening. Okay,
Maybe it's not a lot worse today. It's just pretty much the same.
you think it's the same today? Okay.
Different issues, but it's just as messed up and just as complicated as it used to be.
Well, it's definitely complicated, and we'll point out a lot of complications as we progress through the year. But what they were trying to do, Burr and Wilkinson, is create an independent confederacy of western states. They wanted to conquer Mexico and invade West Florida. Okay. So, in 1806, Thomas Jefferson finds out what's going on, and he denounces it. Well, Wilkinson flip-flops. He's like, oh, really? I'm all about you, Mr. Jefferson. I am your loyal servant. Okay? So Burr is out again. Poor Mr. Burr. Really. Poor Vice President Burr. Right?
Challenging to a duel.
So Burr gets caught, and he's tried for treason. And he's found not proved or not guilty. He fled to Europe. Okay? And then you have another challenge on the home front where you have, so this of course, creates a challenge in your cabinet when your vice president is accused of murder and flees and is conspiring against you. Right? That make sense? All right. Another one that's not quite on that scale is the Yazoo land scandal, where Randolph is attacking Thomas Jefferson because there's a compromise made after this land scandal. There was all this land that was sold, and it was fraudulently sold because the entire legislature had been bribed. So,
The entire legislature bribed.
pretty much, almost everyone in the legislature was bribed. Yes. So the following legislature reneged, or they recanted on the sale, but these people had already bought it, thinking that it was a valid sale. So Thomas Jefferson steps in and awards 5 million acres to the people who purchased the land in this Yazoo sale. All right? But it created a huge scandal, right? Which would seem like a scandal. So, the suppression of American trade and impressment, you've got a few things going on internationally. And one way that we were able to continue the trade during this Franco-Anglo War is that we used a broken voyage. So if we bought something from France, we'd bring it to American soil, run it through U.S. Customs, load it back on the ship, same ship probably, and send it to Britain. So we resold it as British or American goods. Okay? We got away with it for many, many years, but Britain finally said, you know what, really, that is illegal. So in 1805, as they said that it was illegal, it gave them a right in their wisdom that they could search all U.S. ships. And so they came to the shores of North America and searched ships. Actually, just off the shores of North America and searched ships. Okay? So, America, this new country, kind of finding its way, trying to stay out of things, trying to stay neutral, not wanting to go to war, has their ships being searched. They have their sailors being impressed again. Okay? So it's making some people really angry. Right? Okay? Especially some of the Federalists. And so, it's pretty amazing how many ships were seized. Okay? After the broken trade was, or broken voyage was deemed illegal by Great Britain, then France and Britain outlawed all U.S. trade. Okay? Which hurt what? It hurt us. Dramatically. Right? So, the French was seizing ships. Britain was seizing ships. Britain was searching all the ships right off the U.S. coast. They were seizing and impressing our sailors. And then you have the Chesapeake-Leopold affair, where Leopold attacked the USS Chesapeake, which surrendered, and he seized some deserters, who Britain claimed as deserters. But you also have the USS Constitution that was attacked. Okay? And here, killer. It didn't get into this one. I have a picture here of the USS Constitution. I'll show you a picture of it. It's dry docked in, right now it's dry docked in Boston. It is stationed in Boston. It's still commissioned. And so it's a pretty impressive ship. It's all wood. It's called Old Ironsides because it repels a lot of fire. So the Embargo Act of 1807, which prohibited vessels from leaving American ports for foreign parts. Right? It prohibited only the exports, but it's basically stopped all the imports too, because you're not going to send a ship into a country if you can't leave with something on the ship. It's not effective, it's not efficient, right? It's just like semi-trucks. You only go if you're going to bring something back, right? You want cargo both ways so that you pay for the journey. Okay? So, Napoleon started seizing American ships that were trading in Europe and claiming that he was enforcing this embargo. Okay? So these policies that they're putting in place to avoid war are kind of backfiring, aren't they? They're not really helping us. Okay? And so it was bad for the economy. There were a lot of companies going bankrupt. New England, of course, was getting hit really hard because of all their shipping industry, right? One of the benefits, I guess, you might say, of this Embargo Act is it took that capital that had been used for shipping and for imports, exports, and so there was this capital to use. Well, what did they do with it? Because a business person is going to reinvest their capital, right? Do you remember what they did with it? We're going to talk about it quite a bit in chapter 9. They put it into manufacturing. Okay? So this is the reason that our manufacturing is going to dramatically increase. Okay? So they're trying to, they're not, they didn't start and want to diversify their economy. They were forced to diversify their economy because of the bankruptcies and because they had the capital and because they couldn't do anything else. Okay? So this is an important response to the Embargo Act. And so James Madison and the failure of peaceable coercion, again, Madison and Vice President George Clinton are running against Charles Pinckney and Rufus King. Okay? The Federalists are winning some more seats because people are a little upset over the Embargo Act and the oppressment and the economy. Okay? And so they were opposing the Embargo Act. It gave the Federalist Party an issue to use to gain votes, right? And they actually started campaigning now. The Federalists started campaigning versus where people would just automatically vote for them because they were the elite and they were doing it for altruistic reasons, right? Okay, so people campaign today, right? Okay, so this is a new thing that people are doing. And so in March 1 of 1809, Congress replaced the Embargo Act with the Non-Intercourse Act, okay, where they could trade with all countries but France and Great Britain. Okay, didn't really work out so well. All right, so they're trying to gain rights again to trade, and so they're going through these different laws and acts, but it's just not effective because they're not really doing what they need to do, because they're still kind of trying to save face, aren't they? All right, so May of 1810 was Macon's Bill No. 2, which opened trade with Britain and France, which is what they needed to do. But then you have the response of the war hawks who say, you know what, we need more aggressive policies. These measures, we're just getting walked all over, okay? They're oppressing, they're not trading, and our economies stink, okay? This is a problem. And so the war hawks are also known as those who really depended upon and regarded honor very highly. And in this recession of 1808 to 1810, you have an 1810 election where more war hawks are being voted in. Henry Clay of Kentucky, who you will see plays a major role in U.S. history for many, many, many years. Okay? So Henry Clay, John Calhoun, and Henry Clay actually fought duels as well. And I don't know about Calhoun or Johnson or King, but there were many duels fought still in this time frame. Do you have any questions? All right. So Tecumseh and the prophet. Tecumseh was a very well-regarded chief, okay, he was a Shawnee, and he had a brother who they named the prophet. The brother had a vision that said that the natives should return to the old ways, okay, and avoid contact with whites, which creates tension because whites are wanting them to farm, meaning if they can farm, they don't need as much land. If they don't need as much land, then we can use that for settling, right? Okay, so William Henry Harrison, anybody know who he is? He becomes somebody pretty important. An office, he holds an office that's very important. Yes, he becomes president. Okay? One of the reasons that he becomes president is the Battle of Tippecanoe, which helped him win the presidency and discredited Tecumseh and the natives because they had become an ally with Great Britain. Okay? Because the natives were trying to keep their lands and had allied with Great Britain again. Right? But William Henry Harrison understood that in order for settlers to gain more land, they needed more land. And he was governor in Indiana in 1809. He signed the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which was at 2 cents an acre. And after the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which was signed by some natives who didn't necessarily even live in the region, okay, this is when there was the battle, and it was, unfortunately, a losing proposition for the natives. Again, another losing proposition for the natives. Okay. So you have all this going on off the shores of North America and within North America. And so, as an ally of Great Britain, finally, Madison sees war as inevitable. Okay? So you've got Great Britain fighting offshore and onshore. Okay? Because they're allies in this Battle of Tippecanoe. And there was a depression in Britain. Okay? And they were blaming America for their restricted trade, leading to the depression. So, you know, it was the blame game. So who's responsible first, right? It's very hard to determine that, okay? But regardless, America was being blamed for it. There were many who actually opposed going to war. Okay, it's 1812. We're going to war with Britain again. And it was approved along parties. It was a party line, okay? So it followed the party lines more than the sectional lines. Madison actually didn't want war, but by the time 1812 came along, and after all of these things that had been going on, he finally decided, I'm going to have to declare war. So he does. But he actually can't do that, can he? Who has to approve going to war? Thank you. Yes. Okay. So they name impressment, they name British ships in American waters, they name violations of America's neutral rights, the incitement, Britain's incitement of the natives, okay? One of the underlying reasons that isn't overtly said is that we had an economic recession at the time. Okay, in the South and the West, right? So when your economy's bad, things look worse, correct? Right. All right, so the Americans were blaming Britain for the poor economy because of the trade and lack thereof. All right, so you see where they're going back and forth on the blame game? Okay. All right. So, major battles of the War of 1812. The American Navy wasn't strong enough to stop the Great Britain's Navy from blocking the coast. There really wasn't a lot of bloodlust in Congress. Okay, the militia would fight, but the militia would fight, and, for instance, they wouldn't go into Canada. So you had American regulars fighting across Niagara Falls, and you had the militia watching. Okay, so this happened on multiple occasions. All right, because your local attachments were still greater than the national. Okay, people are still regionalized and not nationalized. And this is an important concept because you create a nation and you still have splintering within that nation. Okay? So how does a nation hold together in that case? Many different ways. They work hard to hold the nation together. Remember Washington and all the things that he did to make sure that we remained a viable nation? Okay? There are people who are working hard to keep that nation as a whole. But you can see the divide from the top and from the government versus the people on the ground. Okay? Is that uncommon? No. No, it's not uncommon. You see that today, actually. It's especially prevalent in the European Union. But interestingly enough, the European Union is actually supporting the regionalization. Okay, so on the Canada, America said, Canada's going to be a cinch. We're going to go in, we're going to take over, and it'll all be good. And we were repelled, weren't we? Okay, so unsuccessful attacks on Canada. Perry won Lake Erie, and William Henry Harrison defeated Britain and the natives in 1813, and that's where Tecumseh actually died. There is a fantastic speech that Tecumseh gave regarding America and the nation of the Shawnees and the nation of the United States. If you ever get a chance to listen to it. We don't have time today, and I don't have a good recording of it, but it's fantastic. The British offensive in 1804 is when they really took offense, or went on the offensive, excuse me, and then they got a lot of recruits after Napoleon abdicated as the emperor. Okay, this is when Britain descended on Washington, D.C. and burned the White House. Okay? The reason the White House is called the White House is because they whitewashed it after the fire. Okay, but Dolly Madison came and took the picture, the painting of George Washington as she's leaving and watching it burn. Okay? So, the Treaty of Ghent, August of 1814 is when negotiations began to end the war, and in Ghent, Belgium. All right? The result of the War of 1812 was status quo. All right? Basically, we ended up with the same thing we started with. Okay? Except it did fix the boundary with the U.S. and Canada, and it referred a joint commission for further settlement. Okay? Further out west. And the end of the war in Europe really made the neutral rights and one of the underlying issues behind the War of 1812 really a dead issue. Okay? But the Battle of New Orleans was actually fought after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, and it was a definitive American victory under Andrew Jackson. Okay, 2,000 redcoats lost their lives, and 13 Americans. Right. And the Hartford Convention, the Federalists were really devastated by the Battle of New Orleans, and there were some advocates of secession, and so they were meeting. The goal of the convention was to assert states' rights rather than disunion. And the peace that ensued really eliminated their primary grievance. All right. So in 1816, James Monroe had swept the election, and then again in 1820. So Federalists were really eliminated from national politics at this time. So 1812, 1789 to 1812, not very long. Right? And what would be a great dissertation is if you look at visionaries and you look at, say, startup companies, you have visionaries who start them, right? The nation had visionaries who started it, right? Not necessarily the people who are good at running it. Okay? And I'm not saying that the Federalists weren't good at running it. I'm saying that there is a difference in philosophy from starting something and actually doing the nuts and bolts of running something. Savannah?
I don't know what's the difference between a Federalist and a Democratic.
We're actually going to get through that because it's evolved so much that you can't really describe it well without seeing the whole history. So we will be covering that in class. Okay, so nationalism. We've got, we won a war without reverting to despotism, right? Without having a cruel leader in charge. So we've proven that we can do that. The era of good feelings from 1817 to 1824, okay? Madison's 2 administrations. Slavery was the pink elephant in the room, all right? And so, oh, my throat's hurting. Sorry. So the nationalism comes in. The Star-Spangled Banner came out, all right? Every time I hear the Star-Spangled Banner, I think of the War of 1812 because it was written during the War of 1812, in remembrance of it, okay, the battles. And you also had the elimination of the Federalists, but it was also a time where Republicans were increasingly embracing doctrines that had long been associated with the Federalists. Okay? So it's a division. However, as we talked about in the very beginning of this class today, how far apart are people really? Okay? If the Republicans can take the Federalist policies and implement them within the Republican Party, okay, how far apart were they really? Right? There are a lot of similarities. And again, they were started by the people who had the same vision. They just wanted to start a country, the United States. Right? I mean, they had all fought together originally. Okay, so Marshall, John Marshall and the Supreme Court Justice John Marshall talked about the McCulloch versus Maryland, which was states' rights to tax the federal government, and he ruled it is unconstitutional to tax the federal government as a state. Okay? So you see these things that affect us daily today. There was a panic in 1819 leading to a depression. The Bank of the United States was widely blamed. Okay? Not the first time the Bank of the United States is going to be blamed. Not the last time that a bank is going to be blamed. All right? And it was unfortunately beyond the power of the states. The people didn't like that it was beyond the power of the states. And so it was like an attack on state sovereignty by defending the bank. All right? So the state governments had no power to impose regarding corporations and that. So it was a definitive time in the Supreme Court and in the nation and states' rights. Remember, because Republicans, who are now like the only party, are all about states' rights. Okay, and then you get to the Missouri Compromise. How important is the Missouri Compromise? Valdez, what do you think?
How important is it? Well, you already said it doubled the territory we had.
Well, actually, that
Right,
was...
that was Louisiana, never mind.
Right, thank you. The Missouri Compromise was one of the most important elements in American history. Okay?
I saw the giant mathematical equations.
Okay, so you've got the Missouri Compromise line. People who voted for the compromise didn't like the compromise. And this is going to be important because you have a number of compromises coming up, and they add to the consternation of the people who are forced, in their minds, to sign these compromises. Okay? So the Missouri Compromise was set out by Henry Clay, and the main issue over the Missouri Compromise was slave states versus free states. Okay? And you had double the territory. Were they going to be free or were they going to be slave states? And how did that disrupt the balance of power? Okay? What it all boils down to is the balance of power. Where is it? Who gets it? All right? So the Missouri Compromise is Missouri was admitted as a slave state in 1821. Maine was admitted as a free state in 1820. However, the compromise said none of the territory above this line is ever going to be a slave state again. Okay? So, who won? Huh. Did anyone win? It's a tough situation because you have that balance, and it is truly a balance of power because, remember, you still have the 3/5 clause. And who can tell me what the 3/5 clause is?
You mean the 3/5 compromise?
No, not the compromise. Amber, say that over.
The slaves comes 3/5 vote.
Yes. So if you have more votes, you have more power. Right? Aha. So, what happens eventually to the 3/5 clause? It's what? Correct. It's eventually eliminated, right? But it's not here. And so, people are really upset and wondering where that's going to be. Now, Thomas Jefferson was excited because Louisiana Territory could potentially change the power structure because Thomas Jefferson was all about rural and farming, right? He thought that was the way that the country was going to succeed. The Northeast had a very different economy, right? They had shipbuilding, they had manufacturing, they had business, okay? Those two, at this time, had very different focuses. And so when you get that very different focus and the needs of the citizens seem to be very different, you have tension that's building. Okay? So, although Missouri was implemented as a slave state, the state constitution prohibited free blacks from entering the territory. All right? So, it was seen as a Southern victory, but it reinforced that Congress has a right to prohibit slavery. Okay? So we're starting here in 1820, in 1821, and we're seeing a division within Congress about slavery, which in the era of good feeling, right, had been the pink elephant in the room. People wouldn't talk about it. It was that underlying tension that nobody addressed. Okay? So, this was, again, one of the most important compromises and aspects in American history. So here's a copy of the actual compromise. You know, for people who don't like to edit, when I look at primary documents and I see the editing, look there, resolved, right in the middle of the page, number 2. That, and then they wrote in above it. Okay, they added. Okay. So I figure if Thomas Jefferson and Ralph Waldo Emerson and some of the biggest names in history can edit their papers, that students can edit their papers too. And instructors. I won't discount myself. So foreign policy under Monroe. John Quincy Adams was his Secretary of State. He was a phenomenal Secretary of State. He was a tough negotiator and a fervent nationalist. He strengthened the peace with Great Britain. Okay? He obtained the Rush-Bagot Treaty that demilitarized the Great Lakes. He fixed the boundary to the Rockies. The Adams-Onis Treaty ceded East Florida and renounced claims to West Florida by Spain. Okay? Texas wasn't part of the Louisiana Purchase, but U.S. was now free to pursue Oregon and go all the way to the coast. And this was one of Thomas Jefferson's goals, right? Okay? Monroe gets it done with the leadership of John Quincy Adams. Okay? And here's the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine is important because U.S. would abstain from European wars. America continents are not subject for future colonization from any European power. And U.S. could construe any European colonization in the New World as unfriendly. This is, you're going to see, plays a major role even to today. Okay, so the Monroe Doctrine was of the utmost importance. Okay, the Europeans thought that it was an empty pronouncement. It was not. Okay, any questions? All right, please email me your works cited and your outline.
Can you get mine? I sent mine to you through I scanned and emailed it to you.
There were a couple that came right before class that I didn't get to look at, so I'll double check, okay. Taylor. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? No? We're good? Okay, then I will see you again soon. On Thursday, because today's Tuesday. I remembered.